女士们、先生们、同学们，你们好。首先，我要感谢北京师范大学与国际中国文化传播学院邀请我到这里做这个报告，简单的报告。我为了这个感到非常的荣幸。我今天要讲的是关于那跨文化的哲学和中国哲学中的那个主体性问题。但是因为这个演讲里面的许多词是比较复杂的，而且我用英文说的比较快，所以我就要用英文报告，希望大家了解。好， now I will switch to English. So it is difficult to address the intrinsic link between two complex notions such as transcultural philosophy and subjectivity in Chinese philosophy in a short 10-minute speech. However, because I think that this link is of immense importance for the understanding of Chinese philosophy as such, I will nevertheless try to present its core meaning in an coherent form. So I will start with the first notion and explain why my approach to Chinese philosophy is not based upon comparative, but on transcultural approaches. This is a complex question in itself, but I will try to summarize it in the following postulation. So comparative philosophy, what is comparative philosophy? It compares two or more different streams of or systems of thought that were established or created by different individual philosophers or different philosophical schools or different ideational traditions. So, however, in every process of comparison, we need to set the same standard of evaluations. So, and to apply the same methodology. This is especially troublesome in the realm of comparing Western and Chinese philosophy, because the standards and the methodology we apply in this process is due to the relics of the still prevailing tradition of Western colonial domination, always the Western one. There is no third objective methodology. So such comparisons are rooted in the now very well known but still persisting political reality of overall Western academic, Western-centric academics. So when I investigate classical and traditional Chinese philosophy, I usually prefer to use transcultural instead of comparative approaches. The suffix trans in the term transcultural namely suggests transcending one's borders and limitations while enriching and updating oneself. So it therefore points to the possibility of stepping beyond the very fragmentation and separateness of various cultures and philosophies. In this sense, transcultural philosophies aim at overcoming the outdated stating and immobile concept of cultures in which they were established. So such approaches can offer us a new, fresh view of different philosophical contents embedded in dynamic, historically grown, and constantly changing entities without fixed borders. So in this way, we can also avoid the Western-centric view of the philosophical account of human subjectivity, which was from the viewpoint of traditional comparative philosophy, often seen as something that existed exclusively in the Euro-American traditions. Therefore, it is not surprising that many traditional Western scholars have criticized the Chinese ideational tradition, exposing that it cannot be regarded as philosophy because it lacks several elements that essentially define every philosophy as such, or every philosophical discourse. So one of these lacking elements was precisely the alleged lack of subjectivity. So let us take a look on Hegel. As Heiner Rötz, for instance, he exposed that in every part of Hegel's philosophical system, China occupies the same position of unreflected, unmoved substantiality as against dynamic subjectivity. According to Hegel, just as China has not transcended the early phases of non-freedom of nature and of pre-tragic consciousness in history, religion, and aesthetics, it has not developed philosophy in a strict sense. So for Hegel and many other Western philosophers, Chinese philosophy is therefore only so-called philosophy. Since the subject remains immersed in the substance, namely in the objective order of nature. So from this we can clearly see that subjectivity was seen as something which has to be rooted in an individual. But Chinese philosophy never developed a notion of the individual in the sense of an isolated personhood without any inherent and even necessary connections to other people and to community or society. So another aspect of such Western critique, that there is no subjectivity in Chinese philosophy, focused upon the lack of a clear subject-object relation in Chinese philosophy. But from the viewpoint of traditional, of transcultural philosophy, it can clearly be shown that the notion of subjectivity was not only an important and intrinsic part of Chinese philosophy, but also a specific notion from which Western ideologies have much to learn. Let us take a look. Indeed, the Chinese conceptualization of subjectivity is different from the Western one. Here we could first point to the fact that while in the Chinese language there are two terms which denote two different connotations of the human subject, this is duty. The first one is 主观性, and it refers to the epistemological connotations of the term. And the second one is 主体性. It refers to the ontological connotations of the term. In this aspect, we can clearly see that the Chinese language is much more expressive and provides a much more differentiated and nuanced comprehension of the subject-related concepts and ideas to denote both of the two connotations, which differ from each other to a great extent, especially if we try to think about them in a philosophical way. This fact alone could already be proof for the claim that we cannot speak about the lack of this notion in Chinese philosophy. However, one could agree, of course, one could argue, of course, that this claim is invalid because it refers exclusively to the modern era, after the concept of subjectivity was imported to China from the West. Therefore, let us conclude with a short glance upon the concept of subjectivity in classical Chinese philosophy. As is well known, classical Chinese cosmologies are dynamic ontologies of interactive structural coherence networks, in which the universe is made up entirely of mutual relations between different entities, and no independent, self-sufficient thing can exist without these relations. All this is vividly reflected in the basic structure of traditional Chinese society and the corresponding forms of ethics, which was thoroughly investigated by Roger Ames and Henry Rosemont through the lens of the Confucian role ethics. So such ethical and social systems differ in several fundamental features from the system of individualism, which underlies most Western philosophical conceptualizations of the human subject. In the Chinese relational ethics, or role ethics, in other words, The personhood of an individual human being is not constituted by his or her distinctive personality or character, but rather through the relations with other people and the society as the whole. In the globalized world of today, such an understanding of human subjectivity is of utmost importance, not only for China, but also internationally. Especially considering the fact that in the critical period of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to rely on mutual help and solidarity. This can hardly be established with mutually isolated and self-sufficient individuals, no matter how unique they might be. So with this word, I would like to conclude my presentation and to thank all of you very much for your patient listening.